want to get right to the ground in Ohio. MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell is near Wexner's estate. Also with us, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin, Miami Herald investigative reporter Ben Weider, and here on set with me, MS Now legal analyst, former federal prosecutor Paul Butler. Thanks to all of you for being here. Michael, let's go right to you, because how are we expecting this deposition to play out? And do members have reason to be skeptical about how helpful this actually might be? Because I've heard some of them say that they're concerned he might say he doesn't remember certain things or that he might even plead the fifth. Do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, so, Allie, we are under the impression that this deposition is scheduled to get underway in just a few minutes. It was scheduled for 10 a.m. We're still waiting for official word. As you mentioned, we're just about a mile away from the Wexner estate. And the committee is actually under the impression that Les Wexner may answer questions when he sits down with these members as part of this investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. Remember, with Ghislaine Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's attorney had given a heads up that she had planned to plead the fifth throughout the deposition. They had that heads up. They knew that going in. The committee hasn't gotten that same understanding or heads up from the Wexner team, which is why they kind of expect him to answer questions today when they sit down in just a few minutes. Now, in terms of the veracity of his claims and how much he could actually remember, that's a different story when they go and sit down with him. But I can tell you, these members have a number of questions. Just last night, Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, was on our air. He said he's interested in the financial ties between Jeffrey Epstein and Les Wexner. Remember, Jeffrey Epstein was hired to be a wealth manager for Les Wexner in about the 1980s, a job that he continued for 20 years. Take a listen to Robert Garcia last night.
Why would Les Wexner give Jeffrey Epstein control of his wealth, Congressman?
I mean, that question is at the top of our list. There's probably no single person that facilitated the access to wealth and money that was transferred over to Epstein for services we're not really sure of than Les Wexner. You don't pay a person the amount of money that Wexner was paying Epstein for just financial advice.
And now, Allie, so the financial dealings is going to be one area of focus. But one other thing I do want to mention that's likely to come up during today's deposition is the fact that we are here in New Albany, Ohio. It's significant to the Epstein story. Maria Farmer, who was one of the first women to come out with allegations against Jeffrey Epstein, in a 2019 affidavit, she said that Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell sexually assaulted her at the Wexner estate here in New Albany, where that deposition is happening. So a lot of significance today as the Oversight Committee talks to its latest witness and person as part of this Jeffrey Epstein investigation.
And we expect to hear, Michael, from lawmakers at some point in the next few hours after they finish that closed-door deposition. And then, of course, we'll wait to see if and when they release a transcript or any video that is associated with it. But, Lisa, Michael gave us a good lay of the land, but I want to dive a little bit deeper with you on who Wexner is, his property there, and how it all fits into the Epstein saga. Michael touched on this, but go a layer deeper if you can.
Well, Allie, Les Wexner is the richest person in Ohio. He's worth an estimated $9.1 billion. And he made his money largely as the founder of a company then called L Brands. It's really known to American consumers as the holding company, or it was the holding company for brands like Victoria's Secret, Bath & Body Works, Abercrombie & Fitch. And Les Wexner, with that money, then transformed a section of Ohio that Michael referred to as New Albany into sort of a suburban oasis made in his own image, richly endowing the area through his own philanthropy and creating what many people describe as sort of a white picket fence idyllic oasis of calm. At the same time, as Michael just alluded, Maria Farmer, who is one of the accusers, not only says that she was sexually assaulted by Epstein and Maxwell on an estate that Jeffrey Epstein owned as part of this New Albany complex, but there are also continuing questions about Lex Wexner's association with Jeffrey Epstein. He says that he ended his association with Jeffrey Epstein in the fall of 2007 as some of the allegations that matured into that Florida prosecution came to light. And yet there have been public reports of an email exchange between the two men very shortly before Jeffrey Epstein pled guilty to state charges in Florida in 2008, where Les Wexner basically says to Epstein, you violated your number one rule. Always be careful. The reporting indicates that Epstein's response was no excuse. At the very least, that 2008 email puts the lie to Wexner's assertion that he cut ties completely with Jeffrey Epstein in 2007. And so I expect lawmakers today will want to know how much contact did they in fact have after that point in time where they apparently broke in 2007. How did Wexner terminate Jeffrey Epstein's power of attorney over his estate? Epstein had vast control over that financial behemoth that Wexner was running, Ali, and I think lawmakers will want to know how he controlled it and how it stopped.
Yeah, and I think for other members who are seen in the files, one of the big questions is some of them have publicly said that they cut ties with Epstein at a certain date, and then clearly the files show that they keep some kind of relationship or correspondence with him after the fact. Of course, that's for Les Wexner, but I'm also thinking of the current Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick. And so to that end, Paul, what are the questions, given this background, that you would be asking of Wexner if you were one of the people who was in that room?
So Wexner was key to Epstein's power and influence when he granted him power of attorney that catapulted Epstein from being a plain old millionaire to a plutocrat, somebody who is a billionaire who was able to attract all of these rich and famous people. According to Congressman Khanna, Mr. Wexner was one of the co-conspirators of Epstein that was identified in this recent document dump, and yet there's no evidence that the FBI ever seriously investigated him. The files so far don't appear to contain any memos suggesting what the results of that investigation were. And Ali, he's got exposure if you look at some of the things that we've learned from these records. So in the email that Lisa referenced, he also says, and this is right before Epstein pleads guilty, Wexner writes, "All I can say is I feel sorry, always be careful." And a smoking gun document is in the letters that apparently we don't know if Epstein actually sent, but he wrote a draft letter to Wexner where he says, "You and I have done gang stuff over 15 years. I owe you and you owe me."
Yeah, I mean, even just that sentence on its own begs more questions. And that's in part why I thought it was so telling that they subpoenaed and now are ultimately sitting down with Wexner. I think the other question that's begged, Ben, when you hear about some of what Michael has talked about, the Maria Farmer allegations, the fact that they're in Ohio for this deposition, yes, because it's where Wexner lives, but also because there was a story to be told based on what could have allegedly been happening there. So as you've been reporting on this, take us inside the Ohio angle for Epstein, who, of course, we relate to New York City, to Palm Beach, but has an Ohio story there, too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, Jeffrey Epstein, obviously, what we've heard from survivors over the years is that, any of the homes that Jeffrey Epstein had access to were the scenes of the crimes he's accused of committing. And that's his ranch in New Mexico, his mansion in Palm Beach, he's obviously his home in New York, and the home in New York is significant. And to sort of underline the point, Jeffrey Epstein lived in a massive house in New York that was at one point described as the biggest single family residence in New York City. Well, that was originally bought by Les Wexner. And, we don't fully understand today how Jeffrey Epstein came to be the sole owner of that property. That's one of the things I would want to know if I were in that room. How did he come to control that house? And remember, if we think about Howard Lutnick, the relationship between Jeffrey Epstein and Howard Lutnick was in part because Howard Lutnick was his neighbor. Well, he was his neighbor in a house that Les Wexner had originally purchased. So there are so many connections between Wexner and Epstein. And, again, to underline the point, there is no Jeffrey Epstein, the person we're talking about today, without Les Wexner. The wealth that he got, and he was able to use those connections to Wexner as part of his efforts to seduce and abuse girls. He posed, for example, as a talent scout for Victoria's Secret, according to some of the victims over the years, the company that was owned by Les Wexner. So, those are the questions I would have. Was Les Wexner aware of the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was representing his connections to Victoria's Secret in talking with young women? Was he aware of what was happening, in Ohio, in properties that he was connected to? Or did he just turn a blind eye to the whole thing? It's a reasonable question to ask, and certainly, I think we hope that we'll get some answers to those things.
But I think, Lisa, members of the committee have been clear that in their conversations with Epstein survivors, the women have said to them, follow the money. OK, clearly by talking to Wexner, they are doing that. But what comes of it? What comes of the financial background that Ben just so clearly laid out for us when it comes to $0 for a very nice home in New York City, or money being funneled behind the scenes, or Epstein being allowed to control Wexner's money and be his money manager? Does that amount to anything in terms of something that's prosecutable?
It depends. I mean, Allie, one of the questions that I think members will have, and depending on what the answers are, could be referred to the Department of Justice, is whether Wexner sort of aided and abetted any sort of money laundering or facilitated sex trafficking of women by participating in financial transactions with Epstein that he knew to be shady. One of the things that I would most want to know about is Wexner has claimed that Epstein, in his capacity as the money manager for the Wexner family fortune, misappropriated $46 million from him. That's something that it does not appear Les Wexner ever took to authorities himself. And therefore, you have to ask yourself why. Yes, he's worth $9+ billion, but $46 million is also nothing to sneeze at. If somebody stole $46 million from someone, you would expect them to solicit help from law enforcement. And if Les Wexner did not, in fact, do that, there's a reasonable question of why not?